So, welcome back to the course and to the module number 1, session 3, which is about innovations and in particularly about the emergence of innovations in Africa. So the objectives for this session is to know what are innovations and to understand how knowledge develops into innovations and to think about development of innovations in African contexts. And as you see, you have a certain assessment for this one, and you study the slides and do in the end of this first module the quiz. So let's go further. And let's start again with the key points of this session. So first, innovation is the main driver of regional and national economic development, and it's a very important source to foster sustainable development. So innovation is something, it's a novel and useful product or service or process, so it's a broad concept. The second point is an innovation is actually definable similarly everywhere, but the processes of innovations are significantly different and distinctive across different contexts. So innovation as a concept can be defined the same way everywhere, but how innovations emerge is a different topic. It depends on the context and situations. And the third key point here is that innovation is an interactive process, is a social process, and this process can be supported with adequate policies. So it's not only about the people and enterprises, but it's also about the political processes. So let's go then to the innovation issues in the African context. I already discussed with the last session that we have to focus first on innovations. So how innovations emerge, we need to know about knowledge. So how knowledge is defined, how it is understood, and how the existing tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge, they develop into something new, something novel, knowledge, ideas, and inventions. And remember, knowledge, ideas, and inventions, they are not yet knowledge, but they can turn into knowledge innovations. So further, the development of new knowledge, ideas, and inventions can develop to responsible innovations. And these responsible innovations that respect the needs of the people, that is something that is needed in Africa for sustainable development. And these successful responsible innovations, they emerge by combining the existing knowledge and the needs, the development needs. So you have both supply and you can have also the demand. So supply and demand need to meet each other in a way that then that positively transforms individuals, communities, and societies in Africa. So for sustainable development, you need responsible innovations and this kind of, supply and demand meeting to support this sustainability. And the policies, as I mentioned already, these can support and steer the development of such innovations. So let's go quickly to the definition of innovation. So I use here the definition about 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago by Schumpeter. It's still valid today, like the Platon concept of knowledge for several thousands of years. So the Schumpeterian concept is relevant today. So what is innovation? Innovation is a product, it's a process, it's a market, it's a new raw material, or it's an organizational arrangement. So it is a new or essentially improved. So it do not have to be completely new. It can be also essentially improved. And what is important in Schumpeterian perspective is that the novelty is tested by the market. So if you have an invention and if you launch something to the market, but market does not take it, then it's not really an innovation in Schumpeterian sense. So an idea can combine the existing knowledge and it can become an invention, but it becomes an innovation only when it's applied successfully in market, in process, in society, or in organization. So we need the applicability of something that then becomes an innovation. And there is tacit knowledge and there is physical proximity that sometimes support these innovation processes. So innovation is needed for development, sustainable development. However, actually, if we think about today, most of the global challenges actually relate to existing innovations. If we think about, carbon emissions, they come from, let's say, cars. So the motor of the cars was once an innovation, and that type of innovation now is creating environmental damage and threatening the future of the whole world. So in that sense, there are some controversial aspects in innovations. Sometimes technology and skilled labor is needed in this contemporary development, and that replaces, old technology and unskilled labor. So in that sense, innovation can push many people also out of their existing jobs. And innovation actually does not necessarily reduce poverty, and it can even increase the, income generation. So that can create, challenges in many countries when innovations, are applied. So it does not mean equal distribution of the wealth generated by innovations. And sometimes, innovations in policy support especially focus much more on technology and skilled people and so on. And there are plenty of words now connected to innovations. And actually, by the way, you can use Google Scholar to find research about this, but just Google and find these words, what they mean. Process innovation, radical innovation, design innovation, platform innovation, open innovation, frugal innovation. So plenty of ways to talk about some nuances in innovations. But let's go into the simple definition between incremental innovations and radical innovations. So incremental innovations take the state of the art, the existing products and services as their base, and they modify the product. They modify the service and improve them, and that is an innovation. A little bit enhanced, service production process or enhanced item, technology item is an innovation, but it's incremental, it's growing a bit. The second point is here, radical innovation. That is something completely different. It can even change the whole context. So it can be a completely different product. Like, landline telephones and mobile phones. Landline phones, fixed phones were, place dependent. Mobile phones were, not dependent on specific place. So mobile phone in that sense was a radical innovation, though it, dealt with the same function of communicating between people. So in African context, sometimes, incremental innovations are fine, but in some other cases, radical innovations would be better. And then let's go back to this idea I have several times mentioned, this responsible innovations. Why that is so important? I keep on repeating, responsible innovations are important because they support sustainable development, environmental, social, and economic sustainable development. And secondly, they also address the needs of people. I mean, proper needs of people, not just, consumerism and so on, but they address the needs of people. So responsible innovations are novel or substantially improved products, services, or business models. So they don't have to be radical. They can be radical, but they can also be incremental. And these innovations, solve or alleviate local environmental, social, or economic challenges and support this inclusive transformation of society and communities in Africa. They can, compensate the structural problems that are existing in Africa towards energy infrastructures or waste management or food production. They can produce an alternative way to produce energy, alternative way for food chain, alternative way for waste management or circular economy and so on. And often in African context, these technologies do not need to be very high and advanced. They can also be frugal, with reduced complexity of the product and service, and address in a very good way local needs and challenges. And behind this responsibility is that, the producers of innovations and the users of innovations, they are responsive to each other, and they want that these products, services, and organizations, they are ethically acceptable, they are sustainable, and they are desired in society. So this is important. There is ethical aspect, sustainability aspect, and desirability aspects. And, sometimes it means that the whole innovation changes the life cycle of the product, the whole life cycle, or it just addresses one stage in the life cycle. In the supply chain, in production, in packaging, in distribution, in the use, in the end life, after use. I mentioned already circular economy. So it can be responsible innovations can be in any part of the process. And then about this frugality of innovations, like I said, it means to reduce the complexity of the process, the complexity of the product, the complexity of the service, the complexity of the organization. Because by reducing the complexity, it is easier to use, it is more easy to adapt, it is less cost, and you can develop it further, this frugal aspect. And sometimes and usually these frugal innovations address especially the local context and how technologies can adapt to these local contexts. Whether we talk about agriculture or whether we talk about medicine. So, of course, it includes also compromises in the high-end, fashion and quality of the goods, but it's more affordable for larger masses. And, sometimes these frugal innovations in ICT are important. Now everyone has access to mobile phone. Everyone starts to have access to internet because of the frugal solutions. Everyone does not need to have the newest model, very expensive model on mobile communication, but it can be a smartphone that is easier and cheaper. and therefore more affordable, and it can, bring more people into this digital world. And that also reduces then the digital divide. I mean, everyone starts to have an access and they know how to use it, and the impact of this digital connectivity will be, common around Africa. And let's go then into a couple of other aspects still in this session. So how then learning takes place? And there are two modes here explained, STI mode and DUI mode. So the STI refers to science, technology, and innovation type of learning, and the DUI is about doing, using, and interacting in learning. And this little bit depends on, the context. Often in highly advanced knowledge-based societies, the STI mode is prevalent, and in slightly less developed, the DUI mode is more prevalent. And that's also that one has to take into account when talking about Africa. An African context that vary a lot. In some places, STI type of development is useful. In other contexts, it's not really useful because it requires huge investments and skills and so on. So the STI mode rely on top-down internal research and innovation model, and it aims to global breakthroughs and of those laboratory type of research and analytical knowledge and so on. So this is one aspect that is important in the STI type of development. In sometimes, I think, in medicine, in logistics, agriculture, digitalized services, the STI mode can be fundamental. But in other cases, the STI mode is maybe not wisest, investment by, countries or organizations. Nevertheless, there are very good examples in Africa of STI mode of learning, like iRobotics, a drone software company that is, utilizing data analysis and helps farmers in their everyday activities, or Ethiopian Safe Delivery app helps, women to deliver babies in situations in which hospitals are not nearby and so on. So these kind of applications, they come from STI mode of learning and they are very valuable. Another one is it's called MamaOpe, which is helping to, diagnose and monitor pneumonia. That is a very important dreadful disease in Africa. So if you utilize this application, maybe you are diagnosed faster and you get well. And of course, M-Pesa, that everyone knows, the digital mobile money transfer financing and microfinancing service that started in Kenya. It's applied in other countries as well. That has, helped the lives of people without need to access banks, without need to access, physical money. You can use your mobile phone. So M-Pesa is maybe the brightest example of this STI mode of learning in Africa. However, this DUI mode of innovation development is also very relevant, and in many cases even more relevant. So it means a practice-driven knowledge development, and putting practice and knowledge development together, being interaction, and it's often locally available, it's implicit knowledge and so on. So it's very relevant in many African contexts. Despite the STI is relevant in some contexts, in DUI is relevant in more contexts. So there is a diversity of contexts, cultures, societal organizations, and languages. So that means that it supports the DUI mode of learning and makes it full of potential. And DUI mode of learning is connected often to indigenous knowledge. And that means that, the indigenous knowledge, DUI mode of learning, can be something that creates a competitive advantage for African countries, communities, and the society as a whole. So the factors behind innovation are often, the experiences and practices, and how these experiences and practices are applied to existing knowledge. So that then facilitates the enhancement of goods and services and design and so on. And that fit then better to the varied context in Africa. So utilizing, appreciating indigenous and local knowledge and how to interact with that knowledge and how to address the local needs and challenges through this knowledge. So it is important to remember this STI mode and DUI mode and think about which is relevant in what context when we think about development in Africa. And living labs that will be discussed later in these sessions, it's one good example of using and interacting. So how to understand the local challenges, how to find workshops and communicative ways to address them. But these will be discussed later. And in some cases, this is a very particular case. In some cases, it's useful not to change. And while this not changing, unchanging can bring sustainability. And there's one very nice case of Hadja people that live in northern Tanzania, and they have lived there for hundreds of generations, and they have lived a meaningful life there, and being able to remain sustainable for 10,000 years. So there is maybe something that we should learn about these cases when communities have been able to live for hundreds of generations. So this is a truly case of sustainability. So not changing always is useful, is needed, but you can remain sustainable. So that can be an innovation. So innovation can be an innovation. You can check the details of this in internet. You find videos and other materials of them. So final conclusions. In Africa, there is a demand for novel innovations, new innovations, responsible innovations to respond to social, economic, and environmental challenges. Both STI, so science, technology, innovation, and DUI, using interacting modes of innovations, they are possible, but they require different investments and different innovations. So they need to be contextualized, where the STI mode is more preferable than the DUI mode. And in the end, let's stay here and say it again. Responsible innovations, they are inclusive and they support economic, social, and environmental sustainability. So therefore, these should be really on the agenda in Africa. And let's put finally a few reflections from Finland to this module about knowledge and innovations. So there is a need to understand how the existing knowledge and previous experiences can be developed into ideas and into innovations. And these innovations need to be tested in market economy. Are they successful and inclusive? And do they generate economic profit? And at the same time, are economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable? And it's important to understand the STI and DUI modes of innovation processes and how this indigenous knowledge could be part of that. And there is an exercise for the module 1. So think about, reflect on what innovation opportunities exist in Africa and what are the major structural challenges there. and how these challenges actually, bring in innovation opportunities in talking about climate change, demography, digitalization, or COVID-19. So what could be the positive innovations out of that? And think about indigenous knowledge in your country and how that indigenous knowledge could be connected or is connected to analytical knowledge, synthetic knowledge, and/or symbolic knowledge, and what kind of innovation opportunities it brings to Africa. And then there's a quiz to do, and we will continue with session number 3. Yes. Thank you very much for your attention.